Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks. It's really encouraging just to see the hunger of God here today. Once upon a time, there was a young boy who grew up on a farm in southwest WA with his dad and his mum and his two older brothers. The farm was settled when the boy's great-grandfather came to Australia at the start of the last century. They cleared the farm by hand using only saws, axes, mattocks and shovels. By the time the boy was born, he was fourth generation. It was a beautiful farm. His great-grandparents, his grandparents and his parents had crafted it with the sweat of their brow. The boy used to enjoy travelling around the farm in his dad's ute, feeding the sheep and looking after sick animals. One day he dreamed of becoming a vet so he could help the animals even better. His older brothers also loved farming and would also go with Dad to help out with the cropping, the fencing and the shearing. Anything that Dad needed help with. In fact, both the boys' older brothers decided to come back to the farm after finishing school to become farmers. As the young boy grew older, around his late teens, his dad asked him if he would also like to go farming with his big brothers. By this stage, though, the young man had developed other interests. He got his driver's licence and got a job as a shed hand in a local shearing team. He would often go to the local town late at night to go drinking, smoke weed and find some girls. Sometimes he would stay out 2 or 3 days with his parents not knowing where he was. Then one day the young man asked if he could talk with his dad. "Dad," he said, "I've decided I do want to go farming." He asked his dad if he could have a sizable chunk of the family farm in his own name, signed over to him. "Son," Dad said, "that's not how it works. Everything you see here has been made with blood, sweat and tears. Not just mine, but also my dad and his dad before him. And you can be part of that, but not until I die. Then you'll inherit your share, but for now, come and work with us and learn how to farm." The young man screamed at his dad, accused him of not trusting him. He threatened that if he didn't give him some of the family farm, he would pack up and leave and never come back. So his dad relented and signed over to him a large block of the family farm called the McGregor block. 400 acres of some of the nicest farmland in the southwest. A few weeks later, after dinner, the dad was drinking a cup of tea and looking through the local town newspaper. What he read made his heart sink. There, in the real estate section, was the McGregor block, for sale for $500,000. He'd spent his entire life cleaning it up and making it into quality farmland with his bare hands. This was unthinkable betrayal. When the young son got home from the pub late that night, his dad was still up, sitting at the family table. His face was sad and stained with tears. The brothers were already in bed, worn out from a hard day's work on the farm. He tried to reason with his son, but it was too late. The young man's heart was far from the farm and far from his family. As soon as the land was sold, he packed his things into the back of his ute, and without even saying goodbye, he drove off. He tore down the dirt road, out of the farm, leaving nothing but a huge dust cloud and a family in shock. Within 2 days, the young man had boarded a plane to Thailand, Bangkok. He would spend the next 3 years going from one pleasure to the next. He tried all of the illicit drugs available in Thailand, visited almost every brothel and strip club. He hired fancy European sports cars, he wore Armani suits and ate in the fanciest restaurants. Everyone loved him because he always paid for the drinks. Whatever fetish of food, drug or sex he wanted, he bought. And when the pleasure of the previous night was fading into the hangover of the following day, he would simply medicate it with a more illicit experience. Mobile phones were just invented then, and he had with him his mobile phone from Australia. Every morning he would wait to see a message from his dad, usually sent at about 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. But he would quickly delete them without reading them. The last thing he needed was criticism from someone he'd betrayed, someone he was trying to forget. After 3 years in Bangkok, the $500,000 he got from selling the farmland ran out. He panicked. An Aussie in Thailand couldn't work easily. He tried to get some help from some of the foreign ministers and people he'd previously partied with, but they weren't interested in a poor Aussie who needed help. Eventually, consumed by hunger, he pleaded with the owner of a fancy hotel he had eaten at many times before, just to give him a cleaning job or something. In Bangkok, the pay for someone who cleans plates and cleans toilets is that you get to eat what's left over on the plates. After weeks of trying to survive off leftover table scraps, he grew hungrier and hungrier. His ribs started to show. His mouth throbbed with pain as ulcers from his terrible diet became infected. His left toe was swollen and painful from a glass cut. To see he'd sold his shoes. Fever from the infected wound caused him to shiver at night despite Bangkok's hot evenings, and he slept under some newspapers in the back alley near the hotel. One morning he woke to what sounded like thunder, but realised that his own tummy grumbles had shortened his sleep. He rummaged through his last remaining possessions, hoping to find something to eat, but there was nothing. He'd sold his mobile phone and all the clothes he'd bought in Thailand. All he had was his passport, a spare t-shirt, and an old plane ticket. That's it, he thought. I have a return plane ticket still. I am going back to WA, back to the farm, and see if my dad will at least give me a job cleaning out sheep troughs, pulling weeds out of the crop. He didn't want to presume his dad would still call him son. By asking for the 400-acre McGregor block, he pretty much said to his dad, "You're dead to me. Just give me what you're dying will mean I get now." No, he thought. When I wished him dead, I stopped being his son. But surely he can use a farmhand, or he might know someone who can. That's all I know how to do. The young man's flight arrived back in Perth at the international airport. He walked straight past the baggage carousel without stopping. He had no luggage. He'd lost everything. Standing outside on the footpath, thumb up and arm out, he tried to hitchhike. But when people heard that he needed to get to a farm 3 hours away by car, they just drove off. Eventually he found someone who took pity on him and bought him a bus ticket to the town nearest the farm. From there he started to walk the 15 kilometres from town to the farm. The fever from his infected toe was just kept under control by some medicine he'd stolen from the airport pharmacy. Pus was pouring out from under the toenail, and he grimaced every time his left foot hit the ground. He hobbled a few kilometres before a passing farmer driving a ute took pity on him and gave him a ride, dropping him off outside the farm gate. The young man stood there for what felt like weeks, looking at the family name on the sign at the farm entrance. The farmhouse where he grew up was a 1 kilometre walk down a dirt road. The paddocks were yellow and bare. The summer sun glared down on him until he thought he'd melt. The fever was back, and chills ran through his body despite the blazing heat. Flies buzzed around his infected mouth. He stank. It was actually a miracle that even let him on the plane, and the passengers had changed seats to get away from the smell of him on the flight back to Australia. Even the farmer that had dropped him off at the gate had made him sit on the ute tray to avoid the stench. He started the slow, terrifying walk towards the house. Up ahead in the distance, the silhouette of a large silver farm shed shimmered through the heat waves. The shed was about halfway to the family home. Maybe my dad is working in the shed, thought the young man. Then I can just plead my case without having to go to the house. He limped towards the shed. As it turned out, his dad was there, and what happened next made the young son's weak body stiffen with terror. His dad was running towards him. His dad never ran. He looked to see what weapon his dad might be carrying. His other eye searched frantically around the base of the nearby trees, trying to find a stick or a stone or something to defend himself with. The powerful old farmer was closing in on him, no doubt with deadly intent. Moments earlier, the old farmer had been sitting where he sat so often. From the edge of the shed, he could see out to the entrance of the farm. It's where he had stopped after running after his son that terrible day 3 years before, as the young man had driven off with his inheritance and in a cloud of dust. His son had shamed him, rejected him, and almost crippled the farm business by selling off the best part. Yet every day, the old man, whenever he had the chance, had sat on the log by the shed, watching the front gate, praying constantly that the young man would be all right, that he'd be happy, that he'd come home. And every night as he lay in bed, sleepless with worry, he would send the boy a message. Hoping to get something signed, but his son was alive. The message always read the same. Son, are you okay? Is there anything you need? I miss you. Please come home. The young man couldn't find a suitable piece of wood to defend himself with, and in no time the old farmer was upon him. As he cowered behind a nearby tree, he heard the terrifying sound of his dad approaching. This is my last and only chance to plead my case, thought the son. Dad, I've really messed things up between you and I know I'm not worthy to be called your son, but I just need a farmhand job, or... That was all the words he managed to get out before the dad arrived. Strong arms of a man who had known the meaning of hard work wrapped the young man up in a huge bear hug. My son, he sobbed. My son! Tears streamed down the dad's face as he kissed his son's head. The young man collapsed from weakness, sickness, and relief into his dad's arms. The old man walked 3/4 of a kilometre home carrying his son and laid him on the couch in the family lounge. A few hours later, when the son woke, he looked back down on his dad, who was gently bathing his infected foot. The kind eyes that looked back at him with love were wet with joy. The smell of roast lamb wafted in from the Weber barbecue outside. Family and friends started to arrive to celebrate the homecoming. Music was playing. Two things were becoming very clear to the young man. He was loved, and he was not getting what he deserved. As you can tell, that story gets me. It's not actually a story about me, but it could be. It could be my story. It could be all of our story. As you might have guessed, it's based on one of my favourite parables in the Bible, a parable of what we often call the parable of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15. And I just want to read that parable. And I just want to talk about it today. The message today is actually called What About Jesus? And last week the message was all about, I guess, what sort of a situation we're in and what our predicament is. And this week the message is, what about Jesus? And I want to read this parable and I want to talk a little bit about it and just share some thoughts that I think that I have on that and that I feel like God's given me today. I'm reading from Luke chapter 15 verse 11, if you wanted to read with me. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and the father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" We've given that parable, the title is the parable of the lost son. I actually like to call that the parable of the prodigal father. The definition of prodigal is recklessly extravagant. And if you were here last time when I preached, you know that I love this revelation of God to us as Father. And he's this glorious Father who's unsearchably great. And he's so far beyond even the best model of a human father that we've ever seen. And he is prodigal. He is recklessly extravagant with the way he deals with the returning son here. But the sermon this morning is titled, "What About Jesus?" And I've got two questions that come to mind when I read this parable. And the first question I have, and maybe some of you have had this, is how can the younger son just come home like that? How can the what he's done to that family, how can he just come home and be treated like a celebrity? And the second question is, what about Jesus? Where's Jesus in this story? Where's Jesus in this story? Jesus tells the parable of the prodigal son to help us to see what the Father's like. But how can the Father just do that? How can he just do that? You remember last time I spoke about the fact that we are created to know and enjoy God as Father, but that the human being has a problem, is that we don't want God as Father. Like this boy in my story, or like the son in the parable here, we say, "I want your stuff, but I don't want you." In Jeremiah 2 it says, "You say to a tree, 'You are my father.' You say to a stone, 'You gave me birth.' For they have turned their back to me and not their face. But in the time of trouble they say, 'Arise, save us.' But where are your gods that you made for yourself?" See, a human being made in the image of God, made to know him as Father and receive our name and our identity from him, we actually would rather give ourselves to work success, to money, the latest gadget, a new boat or a caravan or a car, holidays, better house, to another human being, to get identity, affirmation and affection. And effectively what we're saying to that is, "Father, you give me life." How tragic and how evil. How evil. And in Romans, Paul says from chapter 1 verse 21, he says, yep, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused, claiming to be wise. I've got so many mates who just think that I've lost my brain when I turn to Jesus. You know, they've got it all together and they read really intellectual books about why God is a myth. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshipping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshipped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles and careers and boats, houses. That's not the scripture. Now, from verse 28, since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarrelling, deception, malicious behaviour, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning and they disobey their parents. The bar's set pretty low there. They refuse to understand, break their promises, and are heartless, and they have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die. Yet they do them anyway. The son in the parable of the prodigal God does not deserve the homecoming that he got. He deserves to die. We deserve to die. When we actually say to the one who is the source of life, go away, we want to do it our way, we're actually rejecting life and choosing death. And I'm not talking about just little s sin here, you know, the thing that the little sins that the world thinks we mean when we say sin, all the stuff that the boy in the story that I read at the start got up to. I'm talking about big S sin, that general attitude that you think that you're actually morally going okay, but you're actually saying to the God who created you, go away, I don't need you at the centre of my life or even on my radar anywhere. And the wages of that is death. Romans 6:23 says that we're choosing death when we do that. And the whole of the Old Testament, you know, in case we're wondering why is it, the whole of the Old Testament is set up and the whole of the sacrificial system and the sacrifice situation is there for the Holy Father to show us that he doesn't want us just to kind of go, hey, Pops, you know. One day I remember I was hanging out with my dad and we were mucking around and I went, and he suddenly went, don't do that. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, there's a respect that is due to you because you're my dad. And so the high priest in the temple would have to, once a year, he would go into the Holy of Holies to offer a sacrifice for his sin and for the sins of all the people. And that was to be a sacrifice. A perfect, spotless lamb would be slaughtered. His blood would be sprinkled on the altar. And he would have a rope tied around his leg in case he didn't get something quite right. And he'd drop dead. And they'd drag him out. And the next week in the jobs advertised section would be the high priest role. You know, and that was just to say, hey, do not think that this is a light thing. I'm a holy Father. And there's countless stories of that in through the Bible, not just in the Old Testament. So how can this son just rock back in and he's got a celebrity homecoming? How is that happening? Because there's a justice in God that's also in us, and we want to know how. And where's Jesus in this story? A few years ago, I was living in Switzerland. I came to God in a time to repent for something that I'd been doing. And as I was coming to him and I was repenting and asking for forgiveness, he gave me a picture. And in this picture there was little me, about the same age that I probably would have been when I broke my uncle's bottle collection and had to repent of that. And got punished for that, you know. And there was little me there, and I came to God, and he was sitting at a desk. he was Father. And I was repenting, and I was saying, Father, I'm sorry. And he looked at me and he said, it's okay. I forgive you. And I remember in this vision, I just sat there and went, where's the punishment? Because there's always a punishment, right? There's always a consequence. If our kids get wind of the fact that that word sorry means that no worries, they're like, oh, I can do anything. And what's the magic word? It's certainly not please, it's just sorry, because but there's a consequence, right? When I broke my uncle's bottle collection, I had to go and apologise, and I got smacked. There's always a punishment. So I'm standing there in this vision, as I'm praying, as I'm confessing, in front of God the Father, and I'm saying, but aren't you going to punish me? And I'll never forget this. As he was sitting in his chair, he turned around to the desk next to him, and there was a flat screen TV monitor that was facing away from me. And he reached across and he turned the monitor around, and I looked at what was on the monitor. And there was Jesus hanging on a cross, and he was yelling out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the Father looked back at me and he had tears in his eyes and he said, don't you worry, I've punished your sin. I forgive you. When we were utterly helpless, this is Romans 5 verse 6, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Verse 8, but God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Isn't that amazing? That's love. That's love. You might wonder, when I read that story, which I struggled to get through, I'm sorry, why I left one character out. There's one character in that story that didn't appear. That's the older brother. But he's there. And we know from the story that the older brother was really offended that the younger son would just come home. Grace to him was sickening. It sickened him. And there might be some of us here this morning that actually identify more with the older brother. We might find it hard to see someone walking away from God and living in a way that is not the morals or the ethics that they should have. We might struggle not to judge them in our heart. It might be a spouse, it might be a friend, it might be a child of ours. Whoever it is, all we can think about is what they're doing with their life and how wrong it is, and our anger and our judgment towards them actually causes us to struggle to love them like the prodigal father does his son. And this parable is for us because the father also comes out to the older son who's demanding justice and judgment, and he comes out to him and he says, son, in this family we forgive and we love people towards the Father. When we accuse them and we judge them, we actually tell a lie about what God is like. And we may even be keeping the lost sons and daughters away from a prodigal father who wants to run towards them. Where's Jesus in my story? He's everywhere. He's in the dad as he watches the farm gate. He's in the text messages that plead daily to the son to come home. He's in the miracles that had to happen for that plane ticket not to be lost, for the bus ticket to be bought. But mostly, he's in between the dad and the son, removing all of the punishment and the shame so the dad can simply embrace his runaway son. He makes sonship possible. He's the perfect older brother. He's the perfect older brother. Who rather than standing outside judging us, he comes and he finds us. And he does the tough stuff that's needed to bring us back to that family table to enjoy and love his dad with him. The destination of Christianity is not church. It's not even heaven. The destination of Christianity is a Father. And we could not come to a Holy Father when we've betrayed him, rejected him, and done what's actually rightly punishable by death. So he makes a way home through the Son. He makes a way home through the Son, and then he doesn't just leave us there, forgiven and start again. He makes us a new creation. He puts the spirit of sonship in us, and he makes us like him. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of the Father is like a family dinner table where we laugh, we cry with the Father and with our perfect older brother as we watch him and we love him and we let ourselves be loved by him. We'll start to remind people of him. We'll start to become a chip off the old block. I want to share one last story. I was in I don't know where I was at with God at the time, but I was in a church meeting in South Africa. And I was just singing, and God gave me this vision. And I was the prodigal son. I was the returning son, and I was walking up the road, and the father came running down, and he just embraced me. And he was just so happy to see me. And in this vision, I looked up, and I started to come back home, and I said, "Where's my brother? Where is he?" My father looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, "He couldn't be here today." And I looked over his shoulder, and up the back of the farm, on a hill, was a cross. My older brother was up on the cross, and he was screaming. And I realised why he couldn't be there for me to come home. My father looked at me and said, "Son, welcome home." That's love. This is real love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and he sent his Son as a sacrifice to take away our sin, because he knew what we were and he wanted us back. This is real love. The world has got no idea what real love is. That is love. We've just done this series on sharing our faith with others, and I want to finish with the words from Paul. All of this is from 2 Corinthians 5. I want to finish with this. Listen to this. All of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. For God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, "Come back to God." For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. If that's your story, the world needs it. If that's your story, just go. Father, I want to thank you so much. Smile, God loves you is not some little cliche. It's not some pretty, frothy, feel-good thing. Father, it cost you. Jesus, it cost you so much. Pray that we would have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide, how long, and how high, and how deep is this love of the Father in his Son. To know a love that surpasses knowledge, that we would be filled to all the measure of the fullness of God. Father, we just pray that you would just give us that revelation and that power and that I can't hold this anymore, I have to shout this from the rooftops. Understanding and experience of the love and the grace that is ours, totally undeserved in your Son's death and resurrection. And I pray, Father, that if that's an old story, that you would make it new for us again today. Renew and restore to us the joy of our salvation. In Jesus' name.
Thanks, Nigel. It cuts against the grain hearing about the heart of God. It's just so not like me in any way, shape or form. So I suppose all we can do, if you recognise that too, that the purity of who God is not like you, we might as well just lay down our life and just embrace it and accept it as he so passionately wants us to. Why don't we sing a song and just enjoy him, open our heart to him,